One of my favorite tropes in literature is the unreliable narrator. I just finished reading a book last week called Daisy Jones and the Six. You may have heard of it from Reese Witherspoon's book club or seen the Amazon Prime adaptation. It's a fictional story of a 1970s Fleetwood Mac-inspired rock and roll band, told through interviews with each character. The bandmates, the wife of the frontman, the manager. It's a great book with wild stories and even wilder characters. And as someone with no prior knowledge about the 1970s rock and roll scene, I did a lot of Googling while reading it to see what was fact and what was fiction. I loved that it was told strictly through interview snippets because it gave each character a distinct voice and perspective. But the parts that were my favorite were the moments where their stories weren't adding up. When Daisy and Billy blame each other for that thing that went wrong on stage. When Warren and Eddie and Graham each take credit for the hook of that song. When their retellings of the story become more and more unreliable. I love that. What a hilarious fact of humanity that we rely so much on stories, yet we can't even be trusted to get our own ones right. This is also one of the things I love so much about the Bible. Our youth know that we've spent this year learning to understand the Bible through the lens of stories, either through allegories like the Chronicles of Narnia, or by learning about the literary genres present in the book and how that impacts the text. But still, with as much weight as we put in this book, there are a whole lot of unreliable narrators in there, even right under Jesus' nose, walking beside him. As these disciples are walking to Emmaus, Jesus approaches them, and they're doing that thing that people do on long walks and road trips. They're rehashing the events of the past week. It's only been 3 days since everything went down with Jesus, so feelings are fresh, and they had a lot to discuss. The New Living Translation says, they were talking about everything that had happened. Everything that had happened. I feel like that is a bit of an understatement for the things that they just witnessed. But Jesus strolls up alongside them and asks, "What are you discussing so intently as you walk along?" It's a valid question. I've taken my fair share of sad walks or angry runs. And as much as we can try to hide how we're feeling, our faces don't always do a great job of that. There's also this strange phenomenon that when you're on a walk with someone, it's easier to talk to them. You don't have the pressure of maintaining eye contact, so you can't really tense up because your body's moving. Something about the mind-body connection, where our bodies move more freely, and so therefore our thoughts do as well. So as they walk along, the disciples answer him. Cleopas says, "You must be the only person in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about all the things that have happened the last few days." "What things?" Jesus asked. Now, if this was anyone else asking, I think we could call it entrapment. What's his angle here? He knows what happened. Why is he asking them? Jesus wants a disciple to give them their messy retelling of his own story. I mean, let's just throw out the idea of God being all-knowing, and still, Jesus was the one who lived it up there on that cross. He was the one with the nails in his hands and feet. But because he's Jesus and all, he wants to hear their answer, genuinely. From their side of the cross, what things happened? Now, I will say, some of us take stock in telling stories and relaying details of events more than others. A few weeks ago, I was talking to my dad while he worked in the garden, and he jokingly asked, "You didn't notice my new haircut?" Which, in my defense, was under a hat, and he's been getting the same haircut for as long as I can remember. But I admitted, no, I did not notice the half inch that had been taken off of his hair. And then, because I'm a person, I started defending myself, as I just did to you all. It's not personal, I just don't notice things like that. And it's true. You could be one of my best friends, and if someone asked me your eye color, if you wore glasses, if you had braces, I wouldn't have a clue, unless we talked about it or had come up in a conversation or a story. And I'm realizing that I'm arming my youth with a very easy way to play tricks on me, but at least if they do it, I'll know they were listening to this sermon, so a win is a win. But I realized in that conversation with my dad that I'm an auditory processor. If I hear something, it's locked in. I've met 2 members of my best friend Sarah's family, her mom and her cousin, yet I can remember every immediate and extended family member. I know all about her nieces and nephews, her aunts and uncles and cousins, their names, where they live, which branch of the family they're a part of, even though I don't know what a lot of them look like. She has a lot of extended family. This is not information I need to be storing in my brain. But over our 5 years of friendship, she's told me story after story about her family. So that information is just stuck. The other part of me being a verbal processor is that if I have an issue I need to work through, I've got to do it through conversation. I'm very lucky that I lived with 2 therapists in training during college who are always eager and willing to help me process. I think I was their first patient. For me, hearing stories and telling stories are how I make sense of the world. I imagine if I'd just been through what the disciples had been through, I'd most certainly need to talk about it. And if my therapist wasn't available, I'd probably want to be going on walks with friends to process. During March and April of 2020, I don't know about you, but I went on a lot of walks and did a lot of processing. My college friends that were now spread to the winds and I would set up times to call each other while we were on walks in an attempt to keep a slice of our college experience with us and to not feel so devastatingly lonely. Honestly, that's probably where I heard a lot of the stories about Sarah's family, since there wasn't really much life to be updating on each day. You can only tell someone about the sourdough bread you just baked so many times before they threaten to hang up on you. But we didn't hang up on each other. We stayed on the line through all the weird and irrelevant stories, stumbling through our emotions about the world and our sense of impending doom, because we needed someone there to hear us, to share whatever 21st century pandemic version of space we had, and to work on moving forward with. You know, I never have to look very far in that friendship to find Jesus in the midst of it. So they're on their walk, looking sad, trudging along, probably going over the events of the last week while also planning what they'd have for dinner and doing some light gossiping. You can't convince me that the disciples weren't huge gossips. I mean, evangelism is at its core just gossiping for Jesus, right? And then a man shows up and asks to join in their conversation. And maybe it's just me, but when I need to talk, I'll talk. I think I get that from my granny. So when Jesus asks what things, Cleopas jumps right in. Man, Jesus of Nazareth, he was a great prophet, miracle worker, teacher. He was ruffling too many feathers in the establishment and they crucified him. We had hoped he was the Messiah. Oh yeah, and this all happened 3 days ago. Then some women from our crew were at his tomb early this morning, and they ran back all breathless saying his body was missing, which we were like, what? And then they had seen angels who had told them Jesus is alive, and some of our guys ran out to see, and sure enough, his body was gone. So yep, that's the gist. They conveniently left out all the times they, as disciples, totally messed up. No mention of how they fell asleep at the Garden of Gethsemane, or the fact that they didn't believe what Jesus said about coming back. We can't be trusted. And then Jesus does that thing that I love that he does. He gets annoyed and he kind of yells at them. Are you kidding me? How did you not get this locked into your thick skulls, you fools? And then he does that other thing that I love that he does, and he launches into explaining the scriptures and all the ways they got them wrong. Oh, Jesus. I've spent this year listening to the Gospels every morning with Annie F. Downs' podcast, and man, it has changed how I hear Jesus, which makes sense now knowing that hearing things is how I process and learn best. And if there's one thing I've heard in these 4 months listening to the Gospels, it's that Jesus has a fantastic sense of humor and isn't afraid to tell us off when we get things wrong. After the disciples have thoroughly exasperated Jesus by their retelling of events and his lecture to them, he does that third thing that I love that he does, and he doesn't leave them. He stays on the line. He accepts their invitation to stay with them, and they sit down to eat together. When they get to the table, just as Jesus is breaking the bread, the thing they saw him do just a few nights earlier, boom, they recognize him. And just as soon as they do, he's gone. And then my favorite literary trope appears. They said to each other, "Didn't our hearts burn within us as he talked with us on the road and explained the scriptures to us? Are you kidding me? We can't be trusted." They spent hours walking with him and talking with him, never recognizing him, even while he was telling them about his own scriptures. And now Jesus' spot on the floor is barely cold, and they're already retelling the story. When I heard this verse out loud, I literally laughed. If you haven't found yourself laughing while reading the Bible, I encourage you to listen to it to see if that changes things. This book is funny because it's just so real. Frederick Buechner has a book called Telling the Truth, the Gospel as Tragedy, Comedy, and Fairy Tale. And this book really changed how I think about Scripture. I can get a better grasp on it when I see it framed in the genres and archetypes I already know well. And ever since I've been listening to the Gospels, the comedy part has really jumped to the surface. In Buechner's book, he says, "Is it possible, I wonder, to say that it is only when you hear the Gospels as a wild and marvelous joke that you really hear it at all? Heard as anything else, the Gospel is the church's thing, the preacher's thing, the lecturer's thing. Heard as a joke, it can only be God's thing. It can only be God's thing that we would be created so wonderfully and carefully, that we would live so wildly and recklessly, and we would tell our stories so messily. And there God is, walking alongside us, listening and bearing witness to it all. No matter how we process things, no matter what stories we are in the midst of working through, we probably aren't going to be able to tell it 100% accurately. Maybe it's because of pride or trauma-induced memory repression, or in the case of the book I read, might have something to do with the rock and roll lifestyle that the characters were living. I'm not sure that the reason matters, though. We walk and talk together, not because the other person needs to know how you made your latest batch of sourdough, or needs you to tell them the events of the day that they already witnessed. No. We walk and talk because we need to get it off our chest. We need to tell our stories and for someone to be there to hear them, even if and when we get things wrong. This is not an endorsement of telling false narratives or being untruthful. It's an invitation to share your whole messy story, to bring your unreliable self to God. This encounter with the disciples proves that we aren't going to scare God away by showing up as we are, making mistakes, or even by not recognizing Jesus when he's literally right next to us. No. Jesus is going to do that thing that I love that Jesus does. He's going to keep walking by our side. He's not hanging up. He's staying for dinner. And yeah, we might get a lecture along the way, but that walk together isn't going to end until we recognize him, until we've said what we needed to say, told our story the best we can, and heard what we needed to hear, even if it's a hard truth, and seen who we've needed to see, and our eyes are opened to Christ beside us. Don't stop yourself from telling your story out of the fear that someone else might contradict it along the way. We as humans are very bad at having all the facts. Tell your story anyway. Jesus won't walk away just because it's not perfect. That's not what he does. He stays by our side, listens to our stories, maybe throws in a lecture or two where needed, breaks the bread, and only when we've figured out what we needed to figure out, when the light bulb has gone off, then he leaves to let us try to keep moving forward on our own. We are unreliable narrators of our lives. We would make terrible heavenly journalists, but thank God that is not what we're asked to be. The good news is that we are asked to be storytellers, to share our experiences over cups of coffee and walks, during tearful phone calls with friends who remind us of Jesus, creatively through songs and poetry and novels. We don't have to do it perfectly. We just need to keep walking and talking, knowing that the author of the story has it all right and is beside us, listening, holding space, and laughing with us each time that we mess it up.